Welcome. It's Wendy Hernandez with Command the Courtroom. I'm a Phoenix family law attorney and a divorce coach and also creator of Command the Courtroom. So thanks for being here. Want you to remember that this live stream is for educational purposes only. I'm only licensed in Arizona. I'm not giving you legal advice. So if you have a case and you want legal advice, then it's best to consult with an attorney in your area, get a consultation. Often it's worth it to pay a couple $100 if you can to meet with an attorney and get pointed in the right direction. So tonight we have Gwynn Raimondi, and I'm just going to read a quick bio, but Gwynn's going to tell you how you can read more about her. Gwynn is a trauma support practitioner who helps shed light on the interconnections and intersections of our own lived experience, how the experiences of our ancestors have been passed down to us, and how the culture we live in impacts who and how we are in this world. During this episode, Gwyn's going to help us consider why laying down our armor after experiencing complex trauma could be valuable in our lives and how we might begin to do that to live more fully and joyfully. So thank you, Gwynn, for being here and welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you again, for sure.
Yeah, and so I will highlight, so Gwynn and I talked, I don't know, maybe a month ago when we posted her interview up, and it was a fantastic interview. I've gotten a lot of great feedback on it, and we talked about some really interesting subjects. Ancestral trauma, I think is what you called it. So check that video out if you haven't already. But today we're going to talk about laying down the armor. And, the reason I wanted to talk to you about this, Gwynn, is because I was looking at your website and looking at your blog, and you're a fantastic writer, as I've mentioned before. And you had this really great article on laying down the armor after complex trauma. So to start, can you just tell us, what is complex trauma? Like, how is that different from just non-complex trauma? That makes sense.
Yeah, so complex trauma is trauma that is generally happens during childhood. So it's also, it intersects, it intersects with developmental trauma, which is happens from 0 to 3, age 3. And it's chronic trauma. So it's something that happens over and over and over again. It can be abuse or neglect. It can also be things that can be traumatic for humans, and especially children, depending on all the things. Are things like living in poverty, living in homes where there's domestic violence, or where your parents fight, or the primary caregivers fight and yell a lot, even if there's not physical violence. All of these things make us as children feel really unsafe. And so we grow certain neural pathways that say the world isn't safe, other people aren't safe, and that impacts as we grow older, and grow our own autonomy and are able to be in relationships and adult relationships and all that. It impacts the ways that we relate with other people and with ourselves.
So, so that's interesting. When you say it affects the way that we relate with ourselves, can you clarify a little bit what you mean by that?
Yeah, so most of us have the voices in our heads that tell us that we're the negative self-talk kind of stuff, and generally that comes from when we were young, and either direct messages that we received from other adults telling us that we were to whatever the thing is, or we developed the idea that we were just by the way the adults acted around us. And so, it's things like, I will speak for myself. I was raised that, children are to be seen and not heard, and especially girl children are to be seen and not heard, right? And so, so whenever I talk about anything, and I can talk about many things for long periods of time, there has been in the past, I've really worked at getting over it or moving past it. But there was a lot of like that talk of, I'm talking too much and I don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm not, I'm not good enough to be talking about this. And I'm not like blah, 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 blah. Even if, even when I had studied something for years and I actually really do know what the hell I'm talking about. So it's that kind of stuff. And, we all have those messages, some version of those messages. We talk too much. We're too loud. We take up too much space. We're not good enough at this. We're not good enough at that. We always screw things up. We whatever.
I know. It's so true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's so true. I mean, you're like, I'm relating to many of the things that you're saying right now and, here. And, it brings me back to an experience I had a few years ago, which one of my hobbies is making silver jewelry. So I go to workshops and stuff. And one of the times at a workshop, I was showing the instructor something and I said, did I do this right? And she said, yeah, you need to spend more time with the flex shaft, though, doing whatever. And I said, well, I wanted to get off because I didn't want to take it away from people. And she said, Wendy, but you're important too. Like, it's okay if you use that. So I mean, that's not the only time in my life, but that just kind of stuck with me because there was this feeling that other people or I was less important.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that totally brings it around about how this can affect how we relate to ourselves, the complex trauma. Now, so, and how does that affect us, like, just generally as we move through life, as we age and as we get into relationships, as we, vie for jobs?
Right. Well, those messages that then are in our heads they impact the way that we interact with the world and the way we do interact with other people. So, it can show up as, it can show up as perfectionism in a lot of ways. A lot of people who have complex trauma are, a lot of humans actually are perfectionists to a degree or not, right?
Yeah.
And that perfectionism then of I have to get it right, I have to get it right, I have to get it right, stops us from doing things because we don't think we can do it right. Therefore, we're just not even going to try. Or we do a thing, but then we make a mistake somehow, and then we go into beating ourselves up about it. And there's a lot of shame that is involved, and that includes how we interact with other people. So, when we get into arguments, because we all get into arguments with other humans, that's, various points in our lives, right? And if we become like super emotional and start yelling, for example, is it great to yell at other people? No, that's not a great way for us to be interacting with each other, for sure. And also what we take then from that is, oh, I'm a bad person because I yelled. Not I did a bad thing, but I'm a bad person. And I always do, I'm always screwing up. I'm always doing the wrong thing. And so it just like, it feeds itself over and over.
Okay. All right. So you brought up perfectionism about the same time that Gigi, the BT survivor, says perfectionism was something I struggled with for a long time. And just, on Gigi, she says she's a betrayal, trauma, and narcissistic abuse survivor, finally divorced, have entered the dating world, terrified of feeling a connection or dates moving a relationship too fast. So can you tell us why you're nodding your head and smiling?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why I'm kind of laughing a little bit. So one of the things that we do when we live with trauma and we haven't really processed it or done a lot of work on it, is that we will do this thing called trauma bonding. Right. And so trauma bonding, there's kind of two working definitions right now out in the world. One is when we actually bond with an abuser. So, children do that. They bond with their abusers because that's a survival tactic. Even as adults, when we bond with an abuser, it's also a survival tactic. So, it's our partner is physically violent with us, and then we tell ourselves over and over, oh, but they love me. Oh, but they love me. And so it's okay. right? Even though it's not okay. So that's kind of one definition. And then the other is when we are entering a new relationship and we start and we just like we immediately start telling each other all of our deepest, darkest, like most horrible horror stories that ever happened to us in this attempt to build intimacy and build connection, but really that's not what we're doing. we're building a very false intimacy because it's all around the harm and hurt, and then we start. I don't like the term codependent, but it's the popular term. So we start really growing codependent behaviors with each other. Making excuses for harmful behaviors because, oh, well, they were abused as a kid, so it makes sense that they did this, and right. So I understand that that sort of nervousness and anxiety about entering the dating world because there is a lot of inner work that we each need to do around our own boundaries, and knowing timing and when is it appropriate to share certain things with someone. And it's probably not on the first date that we tell someone all of our things, right?
Right.
Or at least not a depth of all of our things. We might give them 10,000 foot level, like, yeah, my parents were the greatest parents. Yeah, and that's it.
Yep. Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, are there any clues or cues that somebody can you name any symptoms, I guess, that a person might be able to identify that they're suffering from suffering? I use that in air quotes. That might signal that there is an issue with trusting after complex trauma. Like, because what if somebody doesn't recognize that in themselves yet? They're getting in these relationships that are unhealthy, or codependent, or they're in relationships and then they don't want to trust. So I don't know if that question makes sense. Like what are the signals? What are the symptoms?
So one of the things that I tell folks is that if you're unhappy more frequently and with more intensity than you are happy in a relationship, that's a sign that things aren't so good. And that unhappy can be, that's a spectrum, right, of unhappy. But if we're, noticing if we make excuses for harmful behaviors from the other person, or if we make excuses for harmful behaviors from ourselves to another person, if we find ourselves in this space of, well, they deserved whatever the thing is that I did, right? Or, the flip side of that coin, I deserved whatever the thing was that they did, right? So those kinds of things. Feeling like when we're starting new relationships, having that really soon, really early in the relationship, having that like intense euphoric feeling of, oh, this is my forever person, and they're like my soulmate and they know me so well and all blah, 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 right? Like that. And when we feel like we're like super close with them, when really intimacy is something that takes time to build. And trust should be something that takes time to build. So, which is why if we're like meeting someone and then we're immediately like telling them all of the things, that's not appropriate because we actually don't even know if they're a safe person for us to tell that information to.
Right. Okay. So that's great. So that leads me into Gwynn. So what are the steps that a person can take to learn to trust in a healthy way?
Right. Yeah. That's a tricky one.
Yeah, that is tricky. Like, I'm sure that's more than you can answer in 15 minutes, but
Yeah. So I believe it starts with learning to trust ourselves, right? And in order to learn to trust, and I believe in order to learn to trust ourselves, we have to really have a sense of embodiment and a sense of what is happening within ourselves physiologically. So, you know, to be able to really notice those, you know, what we often call intuition, right? You know, when our gut does that certain thing, or when our chest does that certain thing, or our throat starts to close up, like those are things that we need to be aware of. Now, that doesn't always mean that there is something wrong, right? You know, I mean, we could be having a trauma or fear or anxiety response, right?
yeah.
And so, but first we have to notice that the thing is happening, and then we can take the half step back and be able to go, okay, why is this happening? What is going on? And try to have a more objective view of a situation and be able to go, oh, this is activating some of my stuff from my ex. That he used to do, and actually this person isn't doing those things, but I'm starting to feel like, you know, and then we need to be able to have communication and conversations with other people, to be able to say, hey, you know, when you do this thing, and I know it's not your intention, and it kind of activates this stuff around my ex. Like I was dating a guy, and he said something about that he owed me. He owed me. And I went into a panic because of things that had happened with my ex-husband about him making statements around that he stayed with me for as long as he did because he owed it to me to do that, right? And so I had a conversation with this guy I was dating, and I'm like, this is why. Can you please not use that word? And he's like, oh my God, I'll never use that word again. Right. And so it's multi-level. It's being able to listen to our bodies and being able to feel the really uncomfortable responses that happen within it, being able to take that half step back, that half breath, and be able to analyze the situation, and then being able to communicate that when appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I think that for a lot of people, well, just taking that pause, I mean, that's important. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
What about the communication? Like for some people, I think the communication feels really scary, Gwynn. You know,
Mm-hmm.
especially when people have been in an abusive or domestically violent relationship. How do they get there where they feel, you know, or for some people, conflict has always been really ugly. Like there's no healthy conflict.
Right,
So,
right.
so how do you get from there, you know, like unhealthy, abusive conflict to like, I'm talking to you about why I am activated right now? What happens
Right.
in between? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so a lot of work happens in between, and a lot of practice, honestly, and it's really messy. Learning for ourselves to be able to express fear, upset, um, hurt without um, blaming, without being accusatory, without, but coming from a place of like, um, of I don't want to necessarily say calmness, like we always have to be neutral all the time, because I don't believe that's true, but sort of a grounded place, um, as opposed to when we're in like when we're in the midst of a fight with someone, of an argument with someone, and we're really activated and we're acting from our survival brain, and we're not really up here in our frontal lobe, you know, using logic at all. We're just like, you know, spewing all the things, right? That is not the time for communication for anybody, because nobody's listening to anyone,
Yeah.
except for listening for the key words of that reinforce our own negative self-talk about either the relationship or about ourselves or
Yep.
about the other person.
Yep. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that. So Norman, yes, Norman, if you have questions for Gwynn, please type them in the chat. and we will see if we can get them answered. So Norman was asking if we're going to do any Q&A.
Oh, do I
This
go
is
to
a
the private chat for that? I'm sorry.
no. So if he posts a question, I'll put it up
Okay.
on the
Okay,
screen.
perfect.
Thank you. So Gigi, I think this is interesting. She says her go-to now is if she feels confused, that's a pink flag. If she voices concerns or asks for clarification and doesn't receive a transparent response, that's a cue to move on.
Yeah. So I believe in I use green, yellow, red flags, right? And so pink is a great color too. You know, that's fabulous. We get to use whatever colors we want. But I think that it's really important to note the yellow flags that are out there too, that are like, okay, I'm gonna slow down. I'm gonna not necessarily say, oh, this is a deal breaker. And also I'm gonna watch this behavior. I'm gonna watch this way of communication, the way of connection, the way they respond to this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, it's also important to remember that we're all human, right? We're all human. And we can be with a person who 90% of the time, 85% of the time responds to us in all, you know, in the ways that we want and need, you know, is transparent, does, you know, is willing to talk about their feelings, is willing to be supportive, you know, all is willing to do their own work and look at their own behaviors and all of that. But then that 10 or 15% of the time, they're like, yeah, no, you know, or they don't respond in the way that we really want and need. And so, you know, depending on what that extreme looks like, you know, what that looks like, we need to decide for ourselves if that's okay and that's acceptable. And also, I think it's really important that we all remember that we are all human. And so I have this thing that I call positive pattern recognition. So as humans, our brains are wired for what's called negative pattern recognition. So it's a survival thing. We needed it to survive, you know, the saber-toothed tigers. We needed it to survive the weather, the elements. We are very good at picking up on little things that trigger that danger flag, right?
Yep.
And that was actually required, that and still is required for our survival as humans. Positive pattern recognition is not required for our survival in any way, shape, or form. Our bodies, our evolution is not dependent on us looking at all the ways people are good to us. It doesn't care. Like, that is not part of surviving. And so we have to be really intentional about recognizing those things.
Got it.
And really, and keeping, you know, I literally keep a little folder on my phone about this guy I was dating, and just like screenshots of really sweet texts he would send and like all of that. And it wasn't in an attempt to like gaslight myself into accepting poor behavior. And it was there as a reminder of, no, he does care about me, and he doesn't actually have to tell me every 5 damn seconds about it. Like,
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
He literally just told me yesterday how important I am to him. And so, like, right? And being able to do that. And that takes intention and practice and, you know, and over and over and over. There's depending on the study you want to read, it takes 3 to 10 more positive experiences than a negative experience for us to lay down a neural pathway.
Wow.
This is good. So we can have one negative experience and it can literally blow away the 10 positive ones that we have.
Wow.
And that's why keeping, you know, a folder or a log or a journal or, you know, whatever the thing is that works for you, that you can go back to kind of remind yourself when you're feeling that, I don't know what's happening here, and to help kind of bring you back to that logic place of being able to examine all the evidence kind of thing of like.
That's great. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, that brings me around to, so I work with a coach, you know, for business and like high performance type coach. And I was having a quote issue the other day, and and I said, I don't know which direction to take. I don't know what to believe. And she said, okay, you're a lawyer, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, give me all the evidence on either side of this issue. And that was like a really great exercise along the lines of what you've suggested here.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So Claire Bear says, how long should we expect to feel activated by triggers, and how to also encourage ourselves to heal enough to get beyond them?
So I'm laughing because the rest of your life is the answer to that, and which can sound very hopeless. And I believe that what we do in our trauma work is we are learning tools to learn how to manage our trauma and our activation and our triggers and all of that. So we learn tools to know how to manage them with time. And again, I believe like wholeheartedly in somatic therapies and doing body-centered therapies as well as with cognitive work, and doing them together. With time and being able to come into your body and being able to listen to it and being able to slow down and all of this, we become less activated less often, right? So it's not that we never ever, we reach a point where we're healed and we're all better and we're never going to be activated ever again. I don't believe that that's even a reasonable goal to have.
Okay.
I don't believe it's possible. And what I believe the tool of trauma work, trauma therapy, trauma coaching, whatever you choose to do is really about growing the tools that help you manage it so that you can slow down, so that you can manage it better, so that you are activated less often and to less of a degree.
Got it.
I work with folks individually and in groups, and I work with folks generally for about 18 months to 2 years, and then I graduate them because they've got everything that they need. Generally speaking, usually they've got everything that they need from me to be able to manage this stuff on their own. And I've had folks who, when doing the self-regulation work specifically, the nervous system work specifically, within a matter of weeks, they start noticing a difference.
Wow.
It can be really quick. Now, it's not like overnight and like, oh, my life has changed differences, but they start to notice how they aren't reacting quite as quickly, or they noticed that they were reacting, or like, whatever the thing was for each individual.
Okay, excellent. So work on the tools to deal with the trauma. That's kind of your thought pattern.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So Norman got his question up there. Norman says, are most abusers unaware of their actions? Is there an underlying mental health disorder?
So I think that so the blanket statement is, I don't think that people are particularly aware when they're being abusive, especially when it comes to verbal abuse or psychological, emotional abuse, because that can be so. We're trained to do that. We're all taught how to do that in our culture and in our families of origin. Physical abuse, probably, do most people know that it's not a good thing to physically abuse other people? Yeah, I think we know that. And I think that we can also convince ourselves, people can convince themselves that, well, they deserved it. They did this thing to me, and therefore I'm responding in this way. That doesn't make it okay, right? Do I think that there's an underlying mental health disorder? So my philosophy of mental health, quote, disorders, and the entire DSM, the entire diagnostic Bible, is that it is all trauma. It is all trauma. Mm-hmm. So when people abuse other people, they were abused.
Got it.
and or their, someone in their genetic history was severely abused, right? And so that doesn't excuse the behavior at all. I'm not saying it does not excuse it. And also it can help explain it so that folks can know, well, where do I need to start to change the behavior? And the start is you need to do your trauma work, right?
Okay. All right. And so I think maybe you kind of answered this question. So Norman says, is abuse learned behavior?
And I think yes and no. So I think yes, in that, we learn things from our families of origin, right? We learn things from our culture and society of what is considered normal and acceptable and okay. Many kids, many adults who I work with, just assume that all of their friends' parents beat them. Like, that was, well, what do you mean your parents don't beat you? Like, everybody, that's normal, right? That's normal. And so there is that idea that we do learn it that way and it is normalized. And also, I think that abuse reactions can also come from a survival instinct of trying to protect ourselves. Again, that doesn't excuse behavior at all. And I think it can help explain it. And so it's kind of a skewed survival response. Because when we live with trauma, or when we have trauma, and we live in a really activated state most of the time, it's because that survival response is skewed. It's turned on all the time. And what we want to do is, we don't want to turn it off so that it never works, because we need it to work. And we want to, regulate it and kind of reset it so that we can change behaviors and we can do different.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you for that. And so Claire says, if we're still needing to engage with an abuser because of a shared child, do you have any suggestions for techniques we can use to build up strength to face their quote stuff on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, so that's those are challenging situations. And one is learning how to self-regulate yourself, how to regulate your own nervous system, how to regulate, how to keep yourself calm, and your system calm. How to take care of yourself before and after an interaction, reminding yourself that, that if when you are interacting with them, you have any kind of trauma response, which of course you're going to, be that anxiety or freeze or like whatever happens, that's normal and that's okay. And then the other piece is really learning to let go of what you can and can't control, right? So it's really you can't control them, and they're going to act how they're going to act. And being able to really do the work of coming to that place of going, oh yeah, you're doing your thing again. All right, well, you're doing your thing again.
Yeah.
And it's not going to bug me.
Yeah.
And I can't do anything about it, and life is going to go on, right? And so I think it's kind of, it's a big combination of those things.
I love it. Those are great, really great suggestions. So Podcast Dude, this is the first time I'm seeing Podcast Dude on the live stream. Thanks for joining, Podcast Dude. So he says, my 18-year-old son feels sorry, buys the sob story about the ex being alone with no one else. I'm concerned he should be going away to college, needs therapy, but can't make him. What are your thoughts on dealing with kids who are older? I have this coming up a lot in my cases, kids who are 17, 18, getting out of high school, and, they are really aligning with one parent. Maybe it is trauma bonding. I don't know. And they're getting into things that may not be healthy for them. Any thoughts on how to manage this?
Lots of empathy for sure, for those situations. And being able to have conversations without bad mouthing the other parent. I think that's really important to be able to do, because if in that situation that was brought up, if you go in and say, oh, well, I'm making an assumption that it's the mom here, that, your mom, she blah, 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 blah. If you go in with that, then ears are shut off and they're not going to hear it, right? And instead talking about, well, how does it feel when they tell you about these things? Or what do you think that, should be done in this situation? Or, helping them kind of do their own problem solving without telling them what to do, right? So, asking questions about, well, what do you want for your future? And like all of those things, and it's really about planting. I mean, with kids, it's always about planting seeds, and just kind of like dropping the seed in and then stepping away and seeing if it takes root. So that's, and especially, the brain is still growing until we're about 25 to 30. So technically we're in adolescence from whenever we hit puberty until 25 to 30 from a brain development standpoint. So 18, they're still really early in that burst of brain development. So
So, and I think that you mentioned during the last time that we talked, when kids are like sponges when they're little, and then they hit this other like growth spurt. Is it like the teen years or?
So 0 to 5 is like the first big hit, and then adolescence. So puberty until 25, 30, depending on all the things.
So during this time, I mean, it's always important then to plant the seeds, but would it be even more so during these periods of time?
If they'll let you, right? Because these, when we look at toddlers, we compare toddlers and teens a lot. And it's because a lot of the same things are happening in their brains. And they're also trying to learn autonomy, right? And so teens, it's really important that we give them the space to grow that autonomy, for them to be their own person. And so, yes, planting seeds, but not planting too many seeds, right? And not like shoving the seeds down into the soil, right? And so it's about communication, and trying to, ask them, well, how do you feel about that? What do you want? What do you think the solution should be? What do you, and get their brains going into that, like their own problem solving, thing. Because that's how they're going to grow neural pathways that tell them, oh, I can solve my own problems. I can figure these things out. I can do these things, right? Instead of us swooping in and taking care of all the things for them.
I think that's so valuable. I think that's great. I mean, it's kind of, that's what I learned in law school, the Socratic method. Like, our instructors didn't get up and just tell us this is the way it is. They asked us questions to help those critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
So
and this is all like really easily said and not as easily done for parents. So like I have a 14-year-old, so I'm not like, sitting here going, oh yeah, it's just really easy. You just have open communication with them. Like, it is not easy. And it takes practice,
Yeah, definitely. I could see that, especially if a parent, was not raised in a way, like, that was in alignment with that philosophy. I don't know how to say it, but
it can be really challenging, and it's really challenging for us to do different than our own parents did, because the behavior wasn't modeled for us. So we don't know what to do, and so we're all kind of just fumbling along trying to figure it out.
Okay. So Tenacious Warrior says that's also why they changed the way math is taught instead of memorization. So is this what the Common Core is about, Tenacious Warriors? Like, trying to figure that out. The critical thinking aspect is a huge life skill. So, okay. Awesome. All right, Gwynn. Well, you have shared a lot of great knowledge and wisdom with us here today, and I am so grateful to you for not just being on the show once, but twice here live. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So, Gwynn, and can you share? I know you have some programs and stuff and some things that are going to be live, which sound really exciting. Can you share with the viewers what you have coming up and how they can find you, please?
Yeah. So my excuse me, my website is gwynraimondi.com. And on it there's theoretically all the things. I have two programs that are coming up. One will be starting at the end of summer, so not till end of summer. One is it's a 7-week writing program, and it's about exploring relationships and complex trauma, how our trauma impacts our relationships, and all different kinds of relationships, so not just our romantic ones, but all of them. And then starting in, I think, mid-October, I just redid my calendar. In mid-October is a 6-month program called Trauma Informed Embodiment for Relationship, and it is it's a really deep dive in exploring our own complex trauma, growing some tools on how to self-regulate, how to co-regulate, how to just kind of do all the things that do some embodiment work, some body reclamation work, boundary work, all of that. So.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I mean, those sound amazing, even for people who haven't been through complex trauma. Like to me,
Yeah.
it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Really
Well,
sounds.
and as we talked about on our other talk, I think we all live with trauma. I think,
Yeah, that's
whether
true.
we personally experienced abuse, neglect, or not, like
It's
at
true.
least our ancestors did. And we live in a culture that tends to be pretty traumatizing. So
That's right. That's right. Great reminder. Yeah. So thank you for that. And
yeah.
so, Podcast Dude, thank you for being here. Podcast Dude says, thank you, Gwynn. Tenacious Warrior, thank you, Ms. Gwynn, for all the great tools.
Yeah.
Mr. Norman, thank you, Norman. It's the first time I've seen you on this live stream. So he's saying, thank you, Gwynn. And anyways, you guys, thanks for joining in. Thank you again to Gwynn. And I will be back next week with another interview, you all. Um, and it's going to be interesting. A guy from the Fathers' Rights movement, and he's promised me no women hating, women bashing at all. He's going to talk about fathers' rights in a constructive, productive way, and I'm really excited to talk to him. So, you guys, until next week, remember to keep on trucking. Get out there and command the courtroom. Give this a thumbs up if you like it. If you haven't already subscribed, subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Love you all. Good night.
Bye.